Good morning, everyone. We're starting the second meeting of the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology. Before we begin, as you know, on Tuesday we passed some routine motions, one of which was to instruct the clerk with respect to ordering food, because this committee sits over the course of the lunch hour. So I just wanted to let members know, if you have any dietary restrictions, allergies, anything like that, if you could please let the clerk know, so that we make sure that we don't have a situation where a member gets sick. We wouldn't want that. So if you could let the clerk know, you don't need to do it now, because I don't want anyone to get ill. So if you could let us know, that would be great. Thank you. And with that, as you know, we have quite a lot of business in front of us, including various notices of motions that have been put forth to the committee. And we also, further to the last meeting, have received notice with respect to C4. And I believe we will need to have a motion to proceed with that. And I see Mrs. Rempel-Garner is ready to go forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I move this motion expecting that I think colleagues will slightly amend it, including my colleague from the bloc, with regard to scope. So I move that pursuant to the correspondence received from the Standing Committee on International Trade on Wednesday, February 19th, 2020, the committee, 1, issue an open call for stakeholders to submit briefings on Bill C4 as it relates to A, auto rules of origin, B, the impact of USMCA on the aluminum and steel industries, C, procurement and changes to intellectual property, no later than 4 p.m. on Friday, February 21st, 2020. 2, that the committee invite witnesses on the same topic to appear before committee for no fewer than 4 hours before noon Eastern on Monday, February 24th, 2020, and that this meeting be televised. That the committee schedule a 2-hour meeting on the evening of Monday, February 24th to draft recommendations to the Standing Committee on International Trade, and that the committee issue a letter of recommendation on these topics to the Standing Committee on International Trade no later than 12 p.m. on Tuesday, February 25th, 2020, the deadline imposed by that committee. So I understand that there might be some suggestions from my colleague from the bloc on the scope, but the goal of this, Madam Chair, was simply to meet the rather intense timelines, but also to ensure that stakeholders had the ability to provide written feedback. Madam Chair, while this is not part of my motion, I would also perhaps just seek it, if possible, if you could work with the Standing Committee on Trade just to see if perhaps we can be privy to their witness list or any draft testimony that has occurred to date, so that we could take that into consideration as part of our deliberations as well.
Okay, perfect. So does everyone have a copy of the motion brought forth? Okay, I know I don't have a copy, but we're having some more done. So,
do you want to have a look at this?
Sure. Thank you. So I'm opening the floor for comments with respect to the motion. Ms. Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate the motion on the floor, and I would be supporting the motion. I just want to make the comment that, you know, we're being put into a situation where we have a unreasonably rushed timeline to look at legislation for this committee. And, you know, if we agree to study the legislation, that's our sections from CUSMA that have been sent to our committee, realistically, from today, we have 2 business days to prepare questions, get witnesses potentially from across the country, and then, you know, only have 2 hours for deliberation on the Tuesday. So I think that this motion, giving more time on the Monday, is reasonable, although still an extremely unrealistic timeline for us to meet. And, you know, it's our duty as parliamentarians to examine legislation, and this timeline, even with the new proposed motion, it makes it really challenging for us to properly fulfill our duties and to fulfill our obligations in the House as defined. And, you know, especially when we look back at the tone set from the government going back to the throne speech, where there was a lot of conversation of spirit of collaboration, working together. The speech from the Prime Minister in the House of Commons, one of the things that he stated was the need for us to collaborate in the House and the need to work together. Mandate letters also having meaningful engagement with government caucus and opposition members of parliament. And, I'm not trying to delay things here, but, and I know that we need to move forward, but, again, recognizing that it's our duty to think deeply and look at legislation closely. And the calls of this government to hurry it up and move along and literally give us 2 business days with a 2-hour meeting is really unrealistic. So this does allow more opportunity for us to hear from witnesses, but still it's a very unreasonable deadline. And, we have to go back to why we're in this situation where we had, our trading partners have had more time in this. The government here did not bring CUSMA to first reading until January 29th. And so now we're in this position where it's hurry it up, and it's important for us to do our due diligence. And in particular, since the government has not provided economic impact analysis. And so, this puts us in a really difficult position and a very tight timeline. And I do want to express how this is not good governance and it's flawed, and I don't believe we're properly fulfilling our duties, but we're doing the best that we can based on the timelines that's been imposed to us. And so that's where we're at. And then those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And any other comments regarding the motion? So I will go to Mr. Erskine-Smith, and then we have Mr. Mercier and Monsieur Lim. Go ahead.
Just to Ms. Gray's point, I mean, we do have a tight timeline. And when I was reading the correspondence from the International Trade Committee, I understood our job to be fairly narrow, actually. And rather than duplicate work from other committees, I thought this is a tight timeline. But when I went to the sections, I thought, okay, it's very limited aspect of the Competition Act, a little bit of Copyright Act and trademarks. That's the bulk of it, to be honest. Some Invest in Canada Act, but this is what we're dealing with here. It's not the full trade agreement. And so the only comment I would have about the motion is that auto rules of origin, the impact of the USMCA on the aluminum and steel industries. I don't know what the amendment from Mr. Lemire is, but we are, if we're already worried about a tight timeline, I mean, it's odd a little bit to expand our mandate in such a short period of time at the same time as complaining about compressed schedules.
Mr. Mercier?
Well, first of all, I want to thank the mover of the motion for working on this quickly and getting us in front of us. I mean, that was a tight timeline in itself. So I do appreciate that. I'll be supporting the motion. I've sat at a couple of meetings at International Trade, and they are doing some of this work as well. I think it is a very tight timeline. There's no doubt about it. But at the same time, I've been the recipient of several government's closures of motions of debate in the House of Commons with not even being able to participate at all. So I'll keep that in terms of reflection of being put to the test of measure of time in the reduction of opportunities. So I think that this is about the best we can do with this. I'd encourage that we do get some of the testimony from the trade if we could. Related to the subject matters, if we could, and also maybe ask their researchers if they have anything that they can share with us, and also get a call out for written submissions right away as well too. Obviously, we're going to have some logistical issues related to trying to get people here, and it would be an opportune time to try to reach out to those that want to get something in today and tomorrow. I think after the motion, because it is a tight timeline. It's unfortunate, but we've got to either deal with this or not, and I'd rather deal with it. And I think the members put forth a plan here that we can at least do, and I appreciate that.
Monsieur Lemire?
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My intervention will deal first of all with the issue of agriculture. So I'd like to add point D. That would deal with agriculture and agricultural producers. I will leave the agri-food industry as well. So that would be able, that would allow us to be able to deal with the issues of agriculture and agri-food in this context. Thank you. We do have an amendment on the floor at the present time.
Mr. Sassy?
Yes, if I could just speak to the amendment, I think we're largely supportive of this motion, the three issues that have been identified, but as has been suggested by other members, this is a tight timeline, and we want to ensure that there isn't overlap in terms of the issues that are being considered. And from what I have heard, the agri-food and portions of the agreement are actually being considered by the Agriculture Committee. So I'm not necessarily convinced that this committee weighing into that particular aspect of the agreement would be particularly helpful when the Agriculture Committee has already heard testimony and has examined the portions of the agreement that relate to agriculture.
Any further comments with respect to the amendment to include agriculture? Mr. Lemire?
À mon sens, c'est important de pouvoir la voir parce
I think it's important for us to take a look at it because there are some very specific items that would fall under us, not just the dairy industry, but that does have consequences for us in terms of the industry as a whole in its global context. So I don't want to multiply the interventions about that, of course, but I want to draw the committee's attention to this. I would hope that this addition could be adopted. Is there a possibility of repeating exactly the amendment that you have before you? I would add point D with respect to this. It would include the agri-food industry. So point D, agri-food industry. Yeah, I can be more specific if you like, particularly with respect to the dairy industry.
I was wondering, Madam Chair, is there not a way of checking exactly the wording in terms of what the Agricultural Committee is looking at? I mean, to look at this possibility of overlap or duplication. Presumably, the terms of reference for that committee are well known, so I'm wondering if the clerk can check.
So if you give us a moment, the clerk is going to double check the actual letter from the chair of the Trade Committee and the exact articles of C4 that were mandated to. So we'll be right back to you at the moment. Mr. Erskine-Smith?
I just have a clarification question because I've not. It's odd to me that we are really faced with 6 hours of. If people want to send briefs, I don't care what they send a brief on. That's fine. If they want to duplicate briefs that they send to us and send to Ag, go for it, copy and paste. But when it comes to our 6 hours that we're presumably going to do the work of this committee, are we going to have witnesses? Are we going to have the dairy farmers in? Are we going to have the auto manufacturers in? Or are we going to do our job on this particular piece of CUSMA and bring witnesses in to speak to the issues that we're tasked with dealing with? I legitimately don't know. With only 6 hours, what are we actually doing here?
Any further comments? Mr. Massey?
I think we're trying to make the best of a situation here. That's the bottom line. So we'll see. I mean, I'm open to the amendment because the problem with agri-food, and it does cross over even from marketing to manufacturing, production, trade, even quotas, series of different things. So we're probably only going to get a quick snippet of everything here. I just rather get her done the best we can, and it will, by adding another person here, it will probably take out maybe one or two witnesses from the others. But again, it's going to be a shallow, quick strike anyways on some of the stuff, and we're going to have to rely on written submissions if we want specific recommendations.
You give us one moment. We're just verifying what the Agriculture Committee has.
So if we look at the motion from CIT, what the Agricultural Committee will be looking at are amendments at the Export and Import Permits Act, the Fertilizers Act, and the Canada Grain Act. I can't say more than that, but from strictly the motion from CIT, those are the legislation that the bill is amending.
Mr. Elsassi?
As far as I understand, looking at the export-import aspect of the agreement are the issues that are squarely of concern to our colleague, which is quotas. So that would cover, it would appear to me, the issue that you're speaking to. And given the tight timelines of ensuring that we do have witnesses by Monday, and that we would essentially just be dabbling into this, I think that would be that wouldn't be particularly productive use of our time.
Do we have any other comments? Mr. Patzer?
Yeah, like I don't see any issue with adding this extra point in here, on a couple grounds. One being that the possibility of overlap, seeing how we do have such a small window here. I don't think we're going to be overlapping any of the other studies that the other committees are going to be doing. And if we want to be able to have a wholesome discussion here, I don't think we need to let other committees tell us what we can or can't be studying as well, right? Like there's enough, in these 3 points, they flow nicely with adding this fourth point in there as well. So I see no harm in adding it in there. And quite frankly, the people that will be speaking on aluminum and steel from the manufacturing aspect, the vast majority of them are going to be agricultural-based companies, exporters, groups as well, right? So I think there is actual good value in adding ag and agriculture producers to the motion.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay. So now we will call the vote for the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. So we'll add that. So now we will go back to the original motion with the amendment of the addition of the agriculture, and we'll make sure we have the exact wording. Are there any other debate or comments with respect to the rest of the motion? And I actually have a question to Mrs. Rempel-Garner with respect to the 4 hours prior to noon on Monday, February 24th. Would that be meetings starting on Monday or meetings as of the end of this meeting? So meetings tomorrow, Friday, and Monday. I just want to get clarity on that. If you could provide us that.
I'm just thinking that just for the sake of the analysts and the clerk and other colleagues, we're probably going to need at least 24 hours to invite witnesses. I think what I'm thinking is, and the purpose of this motion was, let's get a notice out today. I don't know what the protocol is, but I would assume like a press release or something, just an open call to stakeholders for written submissions to be received by noon on Monday. I guess some people will be working the weekend. But perhaps that call could also include that if there is already stuff prepared, like to get it in as soon as possible, and if the analysts could then distribute that to committee so that we could start reviewing that over the weekend. I would think that witnesses should be in sort of ASAP for obvious reasons. The 4 hours on Monday morning, I was kind of thinking that I know that there was some interest from colleagues on perhaps having the commissioner, I'm looking at my colleague across the way, if you want to speak to that, come in for part of that. And then, the typical sort of four witness panels, and then as many as we have. And what I'm also hoping is that if we, depending on how many witnesses we have, any additional time that we have that morning, we can just start considering evidence, because the analysts are going to need time. I think their Monday night is going to be fairly busy, heads up, so that we could start putting a report together and then perhaps consider the final version on Tuesday, which would give us, I think, hopefully enough time in the afternoon to turn it around in both official languages. Giddy up.
Perfect. Thank you for the clarity.
Yeah.
Mr. Skin-Smith?
So in addition to other witnesses, and it sounds like we'll have a lot of different witnesses interested in certainly submitting briefs and maybe attending. The first witness that I think would be useful, and that I know will be available Monday morning, I was hoping would be available today, but is the lead negotiator, who can then explain why we're seeing some of the changes that we're seeing, and if we want to put some questions to him and the officials with him about other provisions within the context of the motion, I think that's fair game, obviously, as well. But that I think would be a useful starting point for Monday morning, and I know that he'd be available. So,
Any further debate on the motion before you? Okay, we'll call a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Perfect, thank you. Okay. So in addition to the motion that is before us, we also have some additional business in front of us. We have various notices of motion. In addition to, the committee has received the notice of the tabling of the supplemental Bs before us to discuss. And so because we are in committee business, I'd like to ask the committee how they would like to proceed. Do we want to proceed discussing immediately C4, given the very short timeline that we have to discuss this with respect to potential witnesses, or are we would like to give maybe a deadline of when we could submit our witness list to the clerk? So I'm throwing this out there. I think this is something first of, and I'm looking at the clerk, who's probably hoping to get that list sooner rather than later. Mrs. Rempel-Gardner?
I'm looking to colleagues for input on this. I really would like to get the witness list from trade, if possible, for us to consider. Just so I think if we could get that and make, like, I'm thinking tomorrow morning for witness coming in, list coming in. If that would be like maybe 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Is that acceptable? Just so that we can consider that information that comes in and talk to colleagues.
Okay.
And also, I would be, just putting it out there, I'd be willing just to have informal conversations as well, because I'm thinking that we're going to have overlap.
Okay.
So,
Okay, Ms. Lavropoulos?
Is that a deadline to submit our own witnesses as well, tomorrow at 9?
Is that acceptable to everybody? Que demain matin à 9 heures, on
Tomorrow morning by 9 o'clock, you submit your own list of witnesses.
Yes?
Are we capable of doing teleconferences as well, too? That's okay. Because that, sorry, let the clerk,
I'll let the clerk answer
do his
that.
job. Yep.
Oh, it's just the logistics of it. If we can set it up in time, for sure. It's just depending on where the witness is located. Less than 48 hours notice is incredibly challenging. But I mean, if we can do it, we will.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And Mr. Sassi?
So just in terms of timing, and this could be just me being confused, but if the deadline for our receipt of the witness list from trade is 9 a.m. tomorrow, could the deadline for us to consider who we want to invite be around noon or 1 o'clock, just to give us an opportunity to review it thoroughly?
I don't think that the deadline to receive the list from trade was 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. We're going to ask the clerk to see if we can get that as soon as possible
Oh, okay.
circulated, so that way in your deliberations of who you would like to invite, you can eliminate people that have already provided testimony. I believe that is correct, Mrs. Rempel-Gardner?
yeah, I guess I mean that doesn't stop us from inviting people again. But I think, and I know that this might not be possible. But whatever information we can get from the analysts at the trade committee, just with regard to if there's any sort of summary of evidence or any sort of preliminary stuff that might, I don't know procedurally how that works, but I'm just thinking that if there's, even the blues, right, that we could start looking at to inform our question writing, our witness lists, and our evidence.
So I'll turn to the analysts.
So I have just asked the clerk to distribute among you a research paper that was created by the library on COSMA that covers many of the things that are on this motion. So that gives you, I think it's about 40 pages, selected information that links with the clauses of the bill. So that's going to be useful to you. I can't guarantee that I'm going to be able to create a briefing note that is tailored to this committee by Monday morning, but I will be reading the briefings that come in so that we're ready to help you draft recommendations by Monday night. And that would be, depending on the size of it, that the only constraint is in terms of translation. So if you approve it by noon, then that's a 4 hours of translation window, 3 hours more realistically. So we're looking at something that is maybe 800 words, 800 words, and then we can do some of the translation ourselves, but then we're not as qualified as the House translators.
Mrs. Garner?
And that's why I'm thinking the meeting on Monday night, if we can at least get it part of the way there so that it's, on Tuesday, it'll be a little bit easier in the afternoon to get that done. But I mean, here we are, right?
So I just want to make sure in terms of clarity, so the proposal that we agreed on in terms of the motion is that this committee would, from my understanding from the analyst, will receive a briefing note from the clerk of the Trade Committee with respect to C4 NAFTA, or the new NAFTA CUSMA. It'll be circulated for everyone to have a chance to read. We will see if we can get a witness list from the clerk. As soon as we can get it, we will definitely share that with you. If it's possible for all parties to provide witness lists to the clerk of this committee by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Again, that can be adjusted if we only receive the list of witnesses from the Trade Committee tomorrow morning. I mean, I want to be flexible, understanding that if you haven't received the information, I don't want to penalize you for not having that information in front of you. So if we do receive it today, can we say 9 o'clock tomorrow morning that you would provide your witness lists? That way it gives the clerk time to actually invite folks for Monday morning and make sure that they are prepared to be able to come on Monday. Now, I just want to double check with respect to the timing for availability. We will try to have this a meeting of this committee from, if I'm looking at the 4-hour window, are you suggesting an 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. meeting of this committee Monday morning, Mrs. Just to make sure?
Yes, unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
Or 9 till 1.
Okay.
I mean,
and then
my colleague's preference.
A second meeting in the evening. Could you provide perhaps a suggestion so that the committee members?
Well, maybe what I'm thinking is, and I'm looking for the will of the room, 8 to 12. Then we have written submissions in by 12. That gives us the afternoon to, in theory, consider written. This is so crazy. So it gives us the afternoon to consider thousands of pages of evidence. And then we should be meeting again at 5, 4, post-QP. Looking at colleagues.
Mr. Massey?
Why don't we do right after QP, so we treat it like a regular meeting and then see how long that goes for us. And I don't think there's probably, no matter what time we pick, we're probably going to have problems. I do worry a little bit about people getting into Ottawa on Monday morning, but I'll just raise that and people to make their travel plans right now, because it won't be a problem for me, but at any rate, because some people with their flights are getting in there, it's a challenge. But at any rate, it is what it is, and I think right after QP we get back at it and see if we can finish the job and get it done.
Mrs. Lambropoulos?
I'm okay with the 8 to 12 meeting. However, if we can push the afternoon meeting to a little bit later, I don't have any staff on the Hill at the moment, and I'm going to be trying my best to come up with some good recommendations. So a little bit later would help in my case.
Any suggestions, Mrs. Rampugai?
5 o'clock?
Yeah. Okay, so we will convene a meeting at 8. Now, if we do not have any witnesses available, I think we might have, I believe, the chief negotiator perhaps available, but we'll double check the availability of witnesses. If there are no witnesses available at 8 a.m. on Monday morning, do you still want to have the meeting start at 8 a.m. or would you like us to advise you when witnesses are actually available? I know I'm getting into the logistics, it's just I want to make sure that folks know what we're in for. Mr. Massey, and then I'll come right back to you.
So on all these, I'm going to cede your judgment on how to deal with these logistics, and also even dealing with witnesses and so forth. I mean, we're in a tight timeline, so I think that, Madam Chair, I'm comfortable with you making a couple of independent calls on these things, with the window being so tight.
Perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Rempel-Garner.
I would just also reiterate the comment my colleague Mr. Massey made earlier, in that if we can have teleconferences, let's try and get that done.
Absolutely. In terms of efficiency, I agree.
And I mean, also, we might, given that we're doing this on Monday morning, there might be logistics with people on the West Coast and in Alberta and Saskatchewan. So if we can try and accommodate that as well. I'm also, if there's somebody who can't be accommodated in that morning block and there's some consensus, I would leave it to your discretion to just see when we're going to be doing that on Monday. I'm kind of planning to clear the day, so
Perfect.
I'm happy to leave that discretion to the analysts, but where possible, if we can use teleconferences as opposed to excluding someone because they can't get childcare or get on a plane last minute, that we're inviting them to speak.
Absolutely. And in terms of efficiency, I think this is definitely the way to go. So we will, based on the recommendations that we get from you for witnesses, immediately start communicating with them to see their availability to invite them for Monday, taking into consideration, obviously, inviting someone from BC to present at 8 a.m. might be a problem. Perhaps we can invite them in the later meeting that's happening. So, of course, we will be back to you, and the clerk will let us know in terms of the timing. And I appreciate your flexibility on this. I know there's a tight timeline. So with that, we have again before us some motions, notices of motions that have been put forth to the committee. If it is the will of the committee, we can perhaps look at those. So we have received, yes, Mrs. Rempel-Garner?
Great. Just with regard to, are we on the topic of discussing motions for future business?
The motions that we have been received, yes.
Okay. I'll just cede the floor to my colleague, because I think my colleague, Mr. Massey, is probably going to go ahead.
Mr. Massey?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, I submitted a motion, and I was hoping that perhaps as we start to plan for witnesses for a larger study, we maybe deal with this first in 2 days for when we come back. So it allows us to do the study and then maybe the estimates for next week. And then we get into this for a couple of days, and then we're done. We get at least a couple things achieved. We get, I think, a better understanding of the situation that's happening to people with regards to the fraud phone calls and so forth. And second of all, some good information for protection for people and consumers related to this. And then we just kind of have it nice and neat and clean. And then it opens us to the opportunity to do more planning. To this, other studies are much more comprehensive and sophisticated than this one. This one's pretty direct. So I was hoping that we could move that and do that as our first hit.
So thank you, Mr. Massey. So he's referring to the motion that was brought forth to this committee at the first meeting on February 18th. I'm not sure if everyone has it in front of you. I can read it out. That the House of Commons Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology hold immediate hearings with the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canada's telecommunications companies, and other telecom experts and advocacy groups to better understand A, the influx of fraud calls to Canadians' home phones and cellular devices, including robocalls, ghost calls, and spam calls, B, to give an update on the successes and failures of the National Do Not Call list, and C, to outline the September 2020 Shake-In measures and how this will benefit Canadian consumers. So that is the motion before us, with an addition of the actual timeline or suggested timeline of when it could be done, basically the 10th of March and the 12th of March. So we sit next week. Obviously, next Tuesday's meeting would be allocated towards C4 to wrap up anything remaining. Next Thursday's meeting to be discussed what we would be doing. And then we are in a riding week. So the following week when we are back on the Hill from the 9th until the 13th, so this would be the 10th and the 12th. If it's an agreement, so first we will agree on the actual motion, and then do we agree on the actual timing of this? So that is before the committee. And I leave the floor open for comments. Mr. Erskine-Smith?
I think it's a good idea because then our next date's March 24th. Gives us lots of time to plan for a more comprehensive study. It sounds like maybe it's a little bit ambitious if it's going to be 2 days. So probably one day might be telcos and another day be RCMP and CRDC. And maybe we don't get so many other advocates, but I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Any other comments? No? Okay, so I will put the motion to the committee for a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Perfect. Thank you. So we will schedule them for ideally the 10th and the 12th of March. So thank you very much, Mr. Massey. For yes, Mr. Massey?
For we have some specific witnesses in there too, but we just encourage members if they're going to allow other members to submit witnesses as well too for the meetings.
Absolutely. So once we will start preparing the calendar, and if you have specific witnesses, obviously that you would like to invite for those meetings, if we can get them to the clerk now, obviously we'll start inviting them as soon as we can.
Yep. Okay.
And I think that extra riding week will assist in getting people lined up for those two meetings. And of
Okay.
course, we will leverage technology, and if we can get folks to do it by video conferencing that are outside of the Ottawa area, that's helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Donc, si vous avez des témoins pour cette étude, should we put...
If you have any witnesses for this study?
Okay.
Can we maybe dispense with that after we get through Monday and Tuesday?
Absolutely. So perhaps
Okay.
we can talk about the witness list for that second study maybe next Thursday. Is that agreeable to the committee? Okay.
So maybe what I would suggest is that we reserve maybe 5 minutes at the end of that meeting just to set that.
Perfect. Thank you, Mrs. Rempel-Garner. So we will do that. Thank you. Yes, Mrs. Rempel-Garner?
I believe that, and I don't have a standard motion in front of me, but I guess I'll make it up as I go along, that pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee would review the supplementary estimates and invite the minister to committee to appear and department officials on the same, and then report back to the House or whatever the standard order is for supplementary estimates reviews, and that we would do that on Thursday of this week or next week, the 27th of February.
Perfect. So I'll open the floor to debate. So that would be to discuss the supplemental estimate B, and also invite ministers and departmental officials. Is that correct?
Correct. And I would just note that there's, several ministers that are associated with the supplementary estimates that touch this committee. I'm looking to my colleagues, but I would extend that to both the Industry and Economic Development Minister, as well as department officials from regional development agencies and any other associated departments.
Perfect. Okay. Just excuse me one moment.
Basic motion.
So I have a question, actually, because we do have a motion that was brought forth to this committee from Mr. Dreeshen, who is not here at the moment, but he actually brought forward a motion to invite the ministers of each portfolio. So would that be included in this one, or would we keep this as a separate motion?
I believe I would never speak on behalf of Mr. Dreeshen. He's quite the character, so I would leave him to move that when he so desires.
Perfect. Thank you
Yes.
so much. Thank you for the
Yes.
clarity. Perfect. Perfect. So we have the motion on the floor to consider supplemental Bs on next Thursday, the 27th of February. Opening the floor to discussion. Seeing none, I will now call for the vote. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Okay. We also have additional motions that have been tabled, including, and Mr. Dreeshens, we will park until he is back and would like to move it. We have 3 motions brought forth by Mr. Jauhari. The first, that the Standing Committee on Industry, Science and Technology study the regulation of telecommunications, including but not limited to an examination of changes to the Telecommunication Act recommended by the Broadcasting and Telecommunication Legislation Review Panel. I will bring that one forward first, and I'm opening the floor. Mr. Johari, is there anything you would like to speak on this motion?
No, I think that motion stands, and I'm open to.
Oh,
Sorry, my colleague actually has to move his motion, and
My-
you have to open the floor and ask for who would like to move motions. Just
thank you.
yeah. Yes.
New. Thank you. So, Mr. Johari, would you like to move the motion?
Yes, I'd like to officially move the motion forward.
Thank you.
If you want me to, I can read it again, but that's that the Standing Committee in Industry, Science and Technology study the regulation of telecommunication, including but not limited to an examination of the changes to the Telecommunication Act recommended by the Broadcasting and Telecommunication Legislative Review Panel.
I would like to now open the floor. Mrs. Rempel-Garner?
I'm not sure. I know we've had some preliminary conversations. I don't think that this particular motion captures the scope of what we kind of wanted to do with regard to study of the telecommunication industry. I would suggest, and I'm just, if you can just indulge me, Madam Chair, while I pull up the actual motion on my phone here. I think that this particular motion has been, there's been quite a bit of study in previous parliaments of it. So I'm inclined probably not to support this, but perhaps we can work the concepts into a different motion. I'm more interested in looking at affordability in and accessibility within to wireless as well as mobile, and probably I think we could look future forward in a 5G operating environment. I'm not sure if colleagues, and I also am interested in looking at the issues that are created. There's going to be a lot more data transferred in that particular operating environment, and I think that there's an opportunity for this committee to be doing a review of some of the privacy components that are contained within the minister's mandate letter, but that are also going to be precipitated by this issue. For me, and I've expressed to some colleagues before, I think something that Parliament hasn't looked at before is the concept of personal data rights and data ownership. I would point the committee to Section 20 of the GDPR, European Union legislation, which talks about, in layman's terms, essentially the right for individuals to be able to contact a company that would own their data and say, you have to give your data back to me, as well as similar related legislation that has recently become law in California around people's rights to be able to tell companies that they can't sell their data. Those two concepts together have given rise to concepts like data cooperatives, where intermediaries, given that people now have those rights, intermediaries could in theory act as a cooperative to sell data back to companies that are using this. And we haven't really, in this parliament, studied that concept. And I don't think it's necessarily, it's not in opposition to the digital charter. I think it's complementary to it, because as this concept emerges, we're going to need to have some chat about what the regulatory environment looks like, if this is something that Canada is willing to consider, especially as other jurisdictions are moving into this area, especially with regard to free trade as well. And I also think that Canada is a player in this regard, because we're a smaller market and might be able to adopt some of these changes. So I don't know if my colleagues feel like that, but I'm not inclined to support this motion, because I don't think it captures the spirit of what we were talking about, but I would like to work with this committee to capture some of the essence of it and perhaps make it a little bit broader so that we're talking about access, affordability within wireless broadband and mobile, that we're talking about data ownership, given the ubiquitousness of data transfer that will come in a 5G operating environment. So that's kind of where we would want to go. And again, if colleagues are more comfortable having this discussion in camera, I'm happy to do that as well.
Okay, so we have Mr. Massé, and then we'll have Madame Lambropoulos. Mr. Massé?
I see that they're submitted that I see that probably could work somewhat and also the crossover with the subject matter a bit as well too. So I see that perhaps we could refine something in a little bit more specific, and so I'm open to the subject matter, and it's about how to go about doing it. So the individual motion, I think it needs to be worked with your other motion and maybe other components for a larger picture thing related to it. On the positive note, I really like your other motion on the clean technologies. And I don't think this committee's actually even studied clean technologies before. So give you on a positive note. But I think the other one is we might need some reworking with regards to the subject because there's all kinds of issues. I got digital rights and so forth that they all affect and cross-pollinate each other in this discussion. So that's what I'm worried about.
Ms. Lambropoulos?
I was just going to say that my colleague had put forward 3 motions at the last meeting, and that the other one does touch a lot on what Ms. Rempel Gardner was talking about. So maybe the combination of this motion and his motion on affordability. And I know that there was talk for adding accessibility in there, which I think members on this side would be happy to incorporate as well.
Okay, now we have Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, just to kind of further add to what my colleague here was talking about, just we have a real opportunity in front of us to really be proactive when we're talking about the digital rights of Canadians here. As 5G rolls out here, we're still a few years away till we have full deployment of it. I think we're looking at about a 5-year window here for that. But we need to be in front of this, right? Because if we become reactive on this and not proactive, Canadians are going to be at a massive loss and a massive disadvantage. So we do have a great opportunity in front of us as a committee to really own the conversation and the narrative around digital rights for Canadians, and I think we need to be proactive as we pursue this.
Any other comment? Mr. Erskine-Smith?
Yeah, so I guess I had a question. When we think about digital rights, we can think of it in the context of data protection and privacy. When we think about digital rights, we can also think of it through the idea of accessing at an affordable price, be it a wireless device, a wireless network. And so we had, when I was going through it, that we had, I think, more than 2. There was a motion on the review of the pricing and affordability of mobile telecommunication services in Canada. There was one on the regulations of telecommunications, including the Telecommunications Act, which would obviously could play in there too. We've got one from Michelle on the spectrum allocation process, which should be part of any conversation about affordability and pricing. We've got also a couple of motions related to the expansion of the 5G network, which obviously is part of the picture as well. I don't see a ton of necessary overlap when we talk about digital rights as between policies on pricing and policies on data protection per se. If we want to collapse them all together, I'm open to the conversation. I would also be perfectly open to a conversation where we have a pretty expansive conversation about the pricing and affordability of mobile telecommunication services, including a review of legislation, the expansion of 5G, the spectrum allocation process, and adding competitors to the market. And then a second larger piece on data protection and privacy. And in the last Parliament, I was part of the Ethics Committee and working with Peter Kent, Bob Zimmer, and Charlie Angus, including colleagues from our side as well, in putting recommendations forward on privacy and data protection. We did speak to Article 20 of the GDPR in respect of data portability, but we didn't actually get into this idea of data trusts and data collectives in a serious way. And I think that would be a very interesting area of conversation going forward as well. So just to say, I think in our minds, it would be useful just to think about pricing and think about data protection as 2 big pieces of digital rights that we should address, but I don't know that we need to blend them together Exactly.
Any other comments? Monsieur Lemire?
Je voudrais ajouter aussi, moi, la préoccupation.
I'd just like to add another concern, but whether or not we bring them all together and regroup them, is this a precursor that we're looking at with 5G? This whole 5G situation appears very important to me. Particularly, there is the rural dimension of access. I believe that involves speeding up the connections on the internet in rural areas.
I suppose the challenge before this committee is to make sure that there's overlap and coherence amongst all the various issues that the committee members want to examine. It would appear to me that the issues that actually do fit in nicely with each other would be affordability, which has been is the subject matter of a motion tabled by the member that we're talking about. That the issues that would go well with that would be access, which is something that's been brought up, and perhaps spectrum, which is an issue that is of interest to Ms. Rempel. So that would be one way of addressing it. The other issue I wanted to bring to the attention of the committee is Madam Rempel also has a motion on the data leak of sensitive information. So whether she would consider actually.
Madam Chair, my colleague is actually, I would remind him of his rules. I believe he's breaching privilege,
Sorry,
right?
yeah.
Because it's my motion and it can't be discussed publicly unless it's moved, I believe. I'm rusty. So I would just caution members to, when we're discussing motions that have been tabled, that have not been made public because this meeting is not in camera specifically, to not be discussing other members' motions.
Sure.
Thank you.
Apologies, oversight on my part. But
It's okay. We're
in terms of bringing together the issues that are of concern to everyone here, it would appear to me that affordability, spectrum, and access would go nicely together.
Okay, so we have a current motion on the floor and discussion about adjusting. We do not have an amendment to the original motion that is before the floor. Yes?
Point of clarification, Chair. If we vote this motion down, but then move another motion, I'm just not clear on how to do this technically, right? So because if we vote it down, is something else out of order? I guess it would still be, we could just vote this down and start something new. That's the correct way to do this. I'm not sure this is amendable. I think we probably need to have a discussion about crafting a motion that gets to the point that we're talking about here.
And to that end, it probably makes sense to move in camera and hash out exact text. I don't think we're going to disagree in the end. It's just we've got a number of motions that are similar. Let's move. I would say we should go in camera and hash it out and get it done.
That's fine.
So is the will of the committee to move into camera to further discussion? Okay, so we will suspend for a few moments while we do the technical work. Thank you.
you.